NATO military aid didn't arrive all at once. It arrived in sequence, and each tranche changed what Ukraine could attempt next. Wednesday, 7:15 a.m., Kherson Oblast, a Ukrainian artillery brigade fire direction center received a target package from a higher headquarters that included coordinates, a time on target, a priority designation, and a munitions recommendation. The coordinates were a Russian engineering battalion headquarters 54 kilometers away. The time on target was 7:31 a.m., 16 minutes. The munitions recommendation was 2 Excalibur GPS-guided 155mm rounds. The fire direction officer processed the mission in the digital fire system, allocated it to the PZH-2000 battery holding the mission capability, transmitted the fire mission digitally to the battery in 11 seconds, and turned back to the next mission in the queue. At 7:31 a.m., 2 Excalibur rounds arrived at the engineering headquarters with a combined circular error of 4 meters. The headquarters vehicle, its communication equipment, and the 4 officers inside were destroyed. At 7:32 a.m., the fire direction officer was already processing the next mission. The 16 minutes from target package receipt to confirm fire solution was the accumulated result of 2 years of NATO aid arriving in sequence, building on itself, each tranche enabling the next one to achieve more than it would have achieved alone. Understanding what that sequence actually looked like, what arrived first, why it arrived in that order, and what each layer enabled that the previous layer couldn't, is the only way to understand how the military aid package became operationally coherent rather than remaining a collection of individual equipment donations with individual capabilities that didn't add up to a transformed force. Aid packages that lack sequence produce forces with expensive equipment they can't fully employ because the supporting systems, the training infrastructure, and the doctrinal integration that would make the equipment perform at its potential never arrived. The NATO military aid to Ukraine avoided this failure, not because the planning was perfect from the beginning, but because the feedback loop between what Ukraine needed operationally and what the contributing nations prioritized for delivery was tight enough, fast enough, and honest enough to keep the package moving toward coherence rather than away from it. The first layer was intelligence and communications. Before precision fires could be employed, before targeting cells could function, before any of the Western weapon systems could perform at the level their specifications described, Ukraine needed a communications architecture capable of handling the data volumes that NATO standard fires coordination required, and an intelligence feed capable of generating targets at the rate that the weapons could service them. The Ukrainian military's existing communications were a combination of Soviet-era analog systems, commercial cellular networks that were vulnerable to Russian electronic warfare, and early digital systems that had been acquired piecemeal without the interoperability planning that would allow them to function as a coherent network. NATO partner nations began the communications infrastructure work in the first months of the large-scale invasion, not with dramatic deliveries of weapon systems, but with terminals, software licenses, encryption equipment, and the training cadre that traveled to Poland and Germany to bring Ukrainian signal officers up to the proficiency level required to operate the new architecture. The communications layer was the foundation. Nothing that came later worked as intended without it. Subscribe to my channel and hit the bell. Every layer of this aid package, every capability it enabled, every operational effect it produced, broken down at the level that matters. The intelligence layer built on the communications foundation simultaneously. The imagery, signals intelligence, and pattern of life analysis that NATO partners provided to Ukraine was delivered through the communications architecture that was being constructed at the same time. Another reason why the sequencing mattered. Intelligence delivered through a communication system that can't handle the data volume or the security requirements produces degraded intelligence at the receiving end. The intelligence and communications layers had to develop together, which required coordination between the contributing nations' intelligence agencies, their signal commands, and the Ukrainian units at the receiving end of both. A coordination problem that was solved incrementally and imperfectly and was still being solved 2 years into the conflict, but was solved sufficiently to produce the 16-minute targeting cycle that the Kherson fire direction officer was running as a routine operation on a Wednesday morning. What's your call? Type A, if the intelligence and communications infrastructure was the most critical first layer that enabled everything else. Type B, if the precision fire systems should have been prioritized earlier in the delivery sequence. Drop your answer below. The counter-battery radar deliveries represented the second major layer and addressed the most urgent survivability problem Ukrainian artillery was facing in the early period of the conflict. Russian counter-battery radar and artillery were killing Ukrainian guns at a rate that threatened to attrit the artillery force below operational viability before the Western systems could arrive in numbers sufficient to replace the losses. The AN/TPQ-36 Firefinder radar, capable of tracking incoming rounds to their origin point and generating a counter-battery target within seconds, was among the highest priority items in the first tranche of American military assistance and arrived before the large platforms that received most of the public attention. Ukrainian artillery officers who had been training their crews to displace after every fire mission, moving the gun before Russian counter-battery radar could complete its track, gained a tool that told them when the Russian counter-battery radar was actively tracking and which direction the incoming counterfire would come from. The information didn't eliminate counter-battery risk. It changed counter-battery risk from an unknown quantity that required constant displacement to a known quantity that could be managed with specific responses. That change kept more Ukrainian guns alive through the early high attrition period. The Western 155mm artillery systems arrived in a sequence that moved from towed to self-propelled and from shorter to longer range as the operational picture clarified which capabilities produced the most effect at the front. The M777 towed howitzer arrived first. Lighter, easier to transport, operable with existing ammunition logistics once the 150mm supply chain was established, and capable enough to provide immediate fire support while the larger systems were in transit. The PZH-2000 self-propelled howitzer followed and changed the survivability and sustained fire rate calculations significantly. The combination of an automatic loading system, a 30-second shoot-and-scoot cycle, and a crew protection level that allowed the gun to operate in counter-battery environments that would have required a towed howitzer crew to displace made the PZH-2000 a different kind of capability rather than simply a better version of the M777. The French Caesar-wheeled self-propelled howitzer arrived alongside the PZH-2000 and brought a different set of advantages. Higher road speed for rapid repositioning across longer distances, lower maintenance burden, and ammunition compatibility with the NATO 150mm supply chain that was already feeding the M777 batteries. The HIMARS and M270 systems represented the operational transition from artillery to long-range precision fires, and their impact was immediate enough that Russian logistics behavior changed within weeks of the first confirmed strikes. Supply depots that had been positioned 40 to 60 kilometers from the front, on the assumption that this depth provided adequate safety from Ukrainian fires, moved deeper or dispersed. The behavioral change was itself an operational effect. Deeper logistics positioning increased the time and vehicle movements required to resupply forward Russian units, increased the exposure of resupply convoys to interdiction, and reduced the stockpiles that Russian forward artillery and armored units could maintain without constant resupply runs. The HIMARS hadn't just destroyed the depots it had hit, it had changed the logistics geometry of the entire Russian theater, forcing every Russian logistics planner to recalculate every supply chain on every axis simultaneously. The ammunition supply challenge that accompanied the Western systems was managed through a coordination mechanism that had no precedent in NATO logistics history and was built under operational pressure while the guns were already firing. 22 contributing nations, each with national stockpiles of 150mm ammunition at different inventory levels, and different political constraints on how much could be released, coordinating their deliveries through a clearinghouse process that matched supply to demand across multiple concurrent operations on a front that measured hundreds of kilometers. The process was imperfect. There were shortfalls. There were periods when specific batteries were constrained by ammunition availability rather than by the target set or the tactical situation. The shortfalls were addressed through production rate increases at American, German, and South Korean ammunition manufacturing facilities that took months to materialize, but that produced a supply chain more resilient than what had existed before the production increases were ordered. The ammunition chain that was barely holding in the first year was more stable in the second, not because the demand had reduced, but because the supply had grown to meet it. The air defense layer of the aid package addressed a threat that was simultaneously the most strategically consequential and the most technically complex to counter. Russian missiles and drones targeting Ukrainian energy and military infrastructure created a dual pressure, civilian suffering that affected military morale and operational capacity simultaneously, and direct strikes on the military infrastructure that the Western weapon systems depended on to function. NASAMS, IRIS-T SLM, Patriot PAC-2 and PAC-3, and Gepard 35mm anti-aircraft guns arrived in a layered delivery that matched the engagement envelopes of the different systems to the threat profiles they were most capable of addressing. NASAMS and Patriot for ballistic missiles and cruise missiles at medium to high altitude. IRIS-T SLM for shorter-range cruise missiles and air-breathing threats at lower altitude. Gepard for the Shahed 136 loitering munitions that flew below the engagement envelopes of the larger systems and were consuming high-cost interceptors to defend against a low-cost threat. The integration of these systems into a coherent layered defense required software interoperability that the systems hadn't been designed with in mind. German engineers worked alongside Ukrainian air defense operators to develop data link adapters that allowed the IRIS-T SLM fire control system to receive threat tracks from the Patriot radar and the NASAMS radar simultaneously, creating a shared picture that allowed the systems to coordinate their responses and avoid committing multiple interceptors to the same threat. The integration work was technically demanding and was conducted partly at the operational sites rather than in factory conditions, which added risk to both the engineers doing the integration and to the air defenders who needed the systems operational during the integration process. The work was completed. The integrated picture it produced changed the effectiveness of each system beyond what its individual specifications would have predicted, because each system was now operating with a threat picture larger than its own sensors could generate. The armored vehicle deliveries that followed the artillery and air defense layers provided the ground maneuver capability that the fires and defense systems had been enabling. Bradley M2A2 infantry fighting vehicles, Marder IFVs, AMX-10RC, wheeled armored vehicles, and eventually the Leopard 2 and M12 main battle tanks arrived in a sequence that built Ukraine's combined arms capability progressively rather than all at once. The sequencing reflected both production and logistics realities, and a deliberate decision by contributing nations to build Ukraine's ability to absorb and employ each capability before the next one arrived. A military that receives 300 tanks without the crew training, maintenance training, ammunition, spare parts, and combined arms doctrine to employ them effectively has 300 expensive machines it can't use. A military that receives 60 tanks with the accompanying package has 60 tanks it can actually fight. The Ukraine tank deliveries were shaped by the second logic, which produced smaller initial quantities than Ukrainian operational planners requested and larger operational effects than raw platform counts would have predicted. What would you prioritize if you were managing the NATO aid sequencing, another tranche of precision artillery ammunition, additional air defense interceptors, or accelerated tank deliveries? Comment your decision and reasoning below. The training dimension of the aid package was as consequential as the hardware and received a fraction of the public attention. NATO member nations established training programs at facilities in Germany, the United Kingdom, Poland, and the Nordic countries that brought Ukrainian military personnel out of the combat zone for periods ranging from 3 weeks to 3 months to train on specific systems, specific doctrinal concepts, and specific operational skill sets that the weapons deliveries required. The total number of Ukrainian military personnel who rotated through these programs across the 2 years of the large-scale invasion exceeded 90,000. 90,000. Across programs covering tank crews, artillery operators, maintenance technicians, air defense operators, medical personnel, logistics specialists, electronic warfare operators, drone operators, and combined arms planners. The scale of the training effort matched the scale of the equipment deliveries in terms of operational consequence, and the two were inseparable. Equipment without trained operators underperforms equipment with trained operators by a factor that no specification sheet captures. The maintenance and sustainment infrastructure built alongside the training programs address the survivability of the weapon systems beyond the initial employment period. Western armored vehicles and artillery platforms are more technically complex than the Soviet-era systems they replaced in Ukrainian service. Complexity produces maintenance requirements that simpler systems don't have. A PZH-2000 with a malfunctioning automatic loading system is a towed howitzer with a better crew protection package. A Leopard 2 with a damaged active protection system is a tank without one of its primary survivability advantages. Keeping the Western systems operational at rates sufficient to sustain the operational effects they had produced required a maintenance system built to Western standards. Diagnostic equipment, spare parts supply chains, maintenance documentation in Ukrainian, and the training to use all of them. Germany established a Leopard maintenance depot at a facility in Poland. The United Kingdom established a Challenger 2 support hub at a separate facility. American maintenance contractors worked alongside Ukrainian military mechanics at forward maintenance sites in Ukraine to build the organic capacity that would eventually replace the contractor support. The electronic warfare countermeasures delivered as part of the aid package addressed a Russian capability that had been degrading Ukrainian communications, drone operations, and GPS-guided munitions effectiveness since the start of the conflict. Russian EW systems in the theater were sophisticated, geographically dispersed, and continuously updated with new techniques developed specifically in response to observed Ukrainian capability. The Western EW countermeasures delivered to Ukraine were a combination of hardware and software. Frequency-hopping communication systems that were harder to jam, GPS anti-jamming receivers for artillery fire control and guided munitions, and drone control systems that use frequency diversity and power management to reduce vulnerability to the Russian jamming profiles that had been suppressing Ukrainian small UAS operations in the most contested sectors. The countermeasures arrived in a cycle that was never fully ahead of the Russian EW developments. Russia updated its techniques, the countermeasures addressed the updated techniques, Russia updated again. The cycle was the expected operational reality of an electronic warfare competition. Winning it meant staying close enough to the Russian update cycle that the degradation never became decisive. The NATO aid kept Ukraine close enough. Don't miss the breakdown of how each individual aid tranche changed the operational picture at the front in the weeks after delivery. Subscribe to my channel and hit that bell. The aggregate effect of the sequence layered aid package on Ukrainian offensive capability was measured most directly in the operations it enabled that would not have been possible without it. The targeting cycle in the Kherson Fire Direction Center. The HIMARS strikes on logistics nodes that moved Russian supply chains 30 kilometers deeper. The Leopard companies that breached a defensive belt built specifically to stop them. The Patriot intercept of a Kinjal hypersonic missile that Russian briefers had described as uninterceptable. Each operation was an expression of a specific capability layer that the aid package had built. The capability layer had been built because a specific contributing nation had assessed a specific Ukrainian operational need, matched it to a specific system in its inventory, moved through the political and logistical process required to release and deliver the system, and invested the training and sustainment support that allowed the delivery to produce operational effects rather than sitting in a maintenance backlog. The cumulative effect was not the sum of the individual contributions. It was larger than the sum because the integration of the layers produced capabilities that none of the layers could have produced individually. Intelligence without fires is a picture with no effect. Fires without intelligence is area suppression without precision. Precision fires with intelligence, but without survivable communications, is a system that works until it's jammed. Survivable communications with precision fires and intelligence, but without air defense, is a system that works until the missiles hit the infrastructure it depends on. The integration of all layers simultaneously was the operational transformation. 16 minutes from target package to confirm kill was not a single capability. It was 6 capabilities working together, each one built by a different nation's aid contribution, each one dependent on the others being present and functional. Was the NATO military aid package most decisive in enabling Ukrainian offensive operations, or in denying Russia the ability to achieve its strategic objectives through attrition of Ukrainian defensive capacity? Type O for offensive operations, Type D for denying Russian attrition. Make your case below. Aid is a commitment measured in delivery dates, not in announcement dates. Every piece of equipment that arrived in Ukraine had an announcement date when the contributing government committed to deliver it, and a delivery date when it actually reached Ukrainian hands. The gap between announcement and delivery was where the operational urgency lived. In the production lead times, the transport logistics, the maintenance certifications, the training programs that had to precede employment. Ukraine's ability to generate the operational effects that the aid package was designed to produce depended on closing that gap as fast as the industrial and logistical realities allowed. The nations that moved fastest from announcement to delivery produced operational effects fastest. The ones that moved slowest produced effects that arrived after the operational windows they were designed to serve had closed. The Wednesday morning fire mission in Kherson Oblast was 16 minutes from receipt to impact. The chain of capabilities that produced that 16-minute cycle had taken 2 years to build, had required contributions from 22 nations across 6 capability domains, and had been assembled under fire, in sequence, against a military opponent actively working to defeat each layer as it arrived. The 16 minutes was the answer to 2 years of effort. The fire direction officer running the next mission in the queue at 7:32 a.m. didn't pause to consider any of that. He had a queue. He had the tools to service it. He worked the queue. That is what operational transformation looks like when it's complete enough to run without thinking about how it was built. If this breakdown delivered the analysis you came here for, like the video, share it, and subscribe to my channel. Every aid layer, every delivery tranche, every operational effect, we build it out at the level the headlines skip. Which NATO aid layer do you think produced the highest operational effect relative to its cost and delivery timeline? And what does the next phase of the aid package need to prioritize if the conflict continues into another year? Drop both answers below.